But I wanted to talk about the new events that are going to happen in Ashes, because, as I said, dynamic events like we know them in Guild Wars 2, in Ashes they're just going to be much more advanced. For example, like just more advanced pre-events, but vastly complex. An example is, for example, after a plague or a natural disaster, that could be a forest fire or a volcanic eruption, or what do you call them? A blizzard, for example, going through an area. Then there'll be a response from either the local factions where that happened, like NPCs or enemies, for example. That could be goblins going nuts with start sieging, because goblins have their own social construct within Ashes. They have like small what do you call them? Like, it varies within the race, but they have like titles and jobs and stuff like that. So goblins are a thing. There will be event timers in form of a world clock. Maybe I should let me pop over to this one and start the video. We can have like a little show going on in the background. Put my notes up, back up. There you go. Most common events are calendar based. That means like a season or in-game holidays, or it can be based on the real world timers, but more like contextualized, where so you'll stay within the immersion of Vera. Some events can lead to a node getting attacked. A node which you would think of as a small city or town, camp. It might be linked to some storylines, or just to weaken the city's defense for potential player attacks later. There are point of interest events that tell the story of a location, and why it's important within Vera. These events can be pre-events to node attack as well, or it could be addressing some sort of like lore for nearby threats, or why maybe some sort of mad enclave of goblins, why they are the enemy of the area, right? The larger a node grows, the stronger these enemies can become. So they can, as in, they will need to be dealt with at some point, right? They can become like outposts for exiled or rivals to your own node, or for example, these enemies can also be like talk active leaders that might have information about certain things, and if these are not addressed, they can trigger other events. And here I imagine some sort of reinforcements, or like, for example, where the weak points are, or where the crops are based, so they can be taken down, etc., etc. There will also be small PvP based events, like small skirmishes that can lead to a war, for example. There will be capture points during node and castle fights, where there are multiple running events, and groups must be split up in order to like complete these objectives. And here my Guild Wars 2 playing friends will think of something like Tangled Depths, for example, where 3 groups have to play 3 different lanes and complete their lane, and then gather in the middle for that. Otherwise the event will fail. There will be notifications about these events, and they'll be opt-in. However, there won't be UI notifications. There won't be like a big banner saying, hey, something is triggering, or a world boss is in motion, or something like that. They will rather be informed of trees falling in a forest, and that might need to be investigated. And if one ignores that notification, which was actually a local event, this may turn into a regional event or even a global event, which have visual clues that are very difficult to miss. For example, a massive blizzard that destroys crops and roads and caravans, etc. So there is that, right? Now to something I find very, very cool is that these events will scale with the level of content that triggers the event. As in, if the event is triggered in a zone with a population average of level 20, then one of the conditions of the event can be that, for example, 10 monsters of level 20 has been killed recently, and the level 20 event will spawn, designed for level 20 players. And here comes the cool part, right? Events will not always be endgame, but events in the endgame might be triggered at a lower level and then act as a pre-event for endgame events. Think of it as if killing centaurs in Queensdale can trigger events in Harati Hinterlands, which can then trigger events in Lake Doric. So you have like low-level event that then triggers the centaurs in other places to become in a defensive mode, or a boss spawning because you completed an event somewhere else. That is pretty damn cool. Events may not be perfectly aligned with real-world events. For example, Christmas, which happens like once per 4 seasons in real world. So you have like spring, summer, autumn, winter, right? And Christmas usually happens in winter, unless you're from a different part of the world. But not necessarily once per month in Vera, as one season in Vera is 1 week in the real world. That means, just so we don't follow the real world clock, you don't have to wait until summer to harvest your seeds. You may plant them in week 2, which is the spring month. Harvest them in late week 3. That makes sense. But yeah, these events are pretty darn complex, if you ask me, and you have to be very, very careful if not to trigger these events. And these events can happen across the world, and there's going to be a very complex way of triggering them and not triggering them. And if you keep ignoring events, these will trigger other events that have disastrous effects both on Vera or your local area. But yeah, that's pretty darn cool, and I look very much forward to checking these out.